Hey guys, how's it going? Silix here. So today I want to talk about mastering, and more specifically, I'm going to be talking about how I master my own tracks. Now, for those of you who don't know what mastering is basically where you're taking a mixed song, making it sound a bit louder, adding that, final polish to it, and you're basically breathing life into the mix. Now, with the whole loudness war these days, people are trying to get their songs sound as loud as possible. And although we want our song to be able to compete with the other music that's already out there, we don't want to be over compressing things and eliminating all of the dynamics, all the life from the mix. We want to be preserving that. So we just have to be aware that as we're mastering, everything we're doing to the mix is very, very subtle. So what I have down here is a reference track, and as you might have guessed, I'm using it as a reference. So I chose a song that has great frequency range and has a great stereo image, and it sounds really, really great. It's already been mastered, and it's in a similar genre to the mix that I'm working on up here. So as I'm going through and adding gain and adding certain plugins to my mix up here, I'm going to be referencing this mix down here. So in case I start going too bright or too dull or too whatever, I can A, B, and say, you know what, maybe I should tone down the brightness. I like how my reference track sounds, and you're using that as a guide, something to aim for. So that's why I'm using that. So without further ado, let's get started here. Just quickly note that in order to start mastering your track, you would generally like to have a good mix. So as you can see by the waveform here, this is one of my mixes here, that it's not too loud. The waveform's generally pretty even. There's nothing popping out too high or too low or anything like that. It's at a nice even level, and it also isn't so loud, and it allows me enough headroom so that I can add some gain and add some color to the track. So you want to make sure that obviously your mixes are maybe peaking between -6 to -3 dB. Anywhere around there is kind of a good level that I tend to aim for. So so the first thing that I like to do with my mixes is do a bit of compression on them. So let's go ahead and open up the compressor here. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and change some of the parameters here, but let me just go ahead and play the track, and I'll start changing things around. You can sort of see what I do, and we'll just keep moving on from there. Okay, so that sounds about right. So what I've done here is I've adjusted the attack and the release here, as well as the ratio and the threshold, to achieve an overall gain reduction of about 1.5, maybe 2 dB max. And then of course I'm making up this amount of gain over here. And of course I chose the circuit type. I chose the vintage VCA because I thought it sounded best out of the ones that I was going through. So now that we've sort of gelled the sounds together a bit nicely, let's move on and do some a bit of saturation. So let's go to the let's see here. Let's go to the exciter, do some harmonic excitement. Let's go ahead and play this now. All right, that sounds pretty good. Again, I'm keeping it very, very subtle. It might be hard for you to hear the difference when I'm turning it off and on, but it's very, very, very subtle, and it's just adding a bit of excitement to the frequencies above around 240 hertz. Typically, I try to keep the sub frequencies. I tend not to excite those because I prefer to keep them nice and clean sounding, nice and pure. All right, so let's just have a listen to the reference mix right now. And of course, as I've already mentioned, this is already mastered. So because this will be louder than what I'm working on now, I've gone ahead and obviously turned it down a bit so that it should be around the same level as what I'm listening to now. So let's just go ahead and have a listen. Okay, so overall, my reference track here is a lot more low end, but I think that's just the style of the song that it is. And mine sounds a little bit lighter, a little bit more brighter, so I might keep that in mind when I move over to the EQ. But what I really like about this track is the stereo image of it. So let's move over and we'll play around with the stereo image a bit of this track up here. Right, imaging and stereo spread. Okay, so once again, I'm just going to hit play, mess around with this, and see if I can get things, just sort of push maybe some of the higher frequencies to the sides. So let's just have a listen. All right, it's not sounding too bad. I'm not too sure about the stereo image right now, but I think that's more going to be a mixing issue. So I think that if I were to want my track to sound a lot wider, then I should have addressed that back in the mix. But you know what? Let's just have one more listen here, actually. You know what, it's actually not that bad. So I guess for the purposes of this tutorial, we're just going to leave it as it is now. But if I really wanted to go back, I might, like I said, I might go back to the actual mixing session for the song and adjust a few things to get it to where I'm happy with it. So yeah, so it's just a good thing to keep in mind that normally if I can't get something to sound the way I want it to during mastering, excuse me, I will go back to the mixing session and fix things. And often this might happen 2, 3, 4, 5 times, right? Because it's important to have it to sound good and how you want it to sound. All right, so moving on here, I think what I'm going to add here is an EQ now. So again, I'm just going to go ahead and press play and see what I can come up with. and actually just listen to see what it needs actually. Okay, so I'd like to bring out some of the percussion sounds that are happening. So I might try to brighten it up. And that kick, I might try and make the kick stand out a bit more by adding a bit of thump in this low end here. So let's see what we can do. Okay, so I like how the higher end's starting to sound now. I like the kick, but I think some of the mid frequencies might be a bit too strong. So let's see if we can try to attenuate those just a bit. Okay, so again, I'm going to check my reference again, and then I'm going to be doing an A/B on the EQ for my track up here. Okay, okay, it's not sounding too bad, and I apologize if there's any clipping or any stuttering of the audio right now. I'm currently having an issue in Logic Pro where my CPU is jumping through the roof. I haven't been able to figure it out now, so I'm hoping it's not going to be too big of an issue for this tutorial. Okay, so let's just go ahead and A/B the EQ right now and see how that sounds. Okay, so it seems to really bring out those percussion, a bit of the snare, and I like the thud of the kick. So, you know, it's very, very subtle, but I think it adds just what I wanted it to. So that's great. Okay, now the last thing in the chain. Let's go ahead and add a limiter. So I'll be choosing the adaptive limiter here. I'm going to put the gain back down to 0, the output ceiling to minus 0.1 to stop any chance of clipping whatsoever. And let's just go ahead and press play, and we'll start to make up some of the gain. Okay, and just to mention at this point, I can now bring up my reference track to 0. So now we're going to be referencing, and they should be we should be going for an even volume here for both these tracks. Again, I do apologize for the CPU spikes here. We're getting some clipping of the audio, but hopefully you can still get an understanding of how things are sounding here. So the levels are pretty even right now between the two tracks. I'm just going to go ahead and have one final listen to it. Again, don't be too concerned with because there's quite a difference between the whole bass and of the bass between the two tracks here. This particular song down here just happens to be pretty bass heavy. So for future reference, I might pick a different song as a reference track. But yeah, I think my track sounded not too bad here. We can go ahead and bounce, and I always like to have a look at the final waveform. So let's go ahead and bounce this track here. Oops, wasn't done talking yet. So we'll go ahead and bounce this track. We'll see how it sounds, and then we'll take a look at the waveform and compare it to the reference track down here. Okay, actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep my microphone on here so I can talk about what I'll be doing here. So I'm working in, now I am, so I like to bounce my tracks 24-bit wave to ensure the highest quality. And then of course if you're going to convert to MP3 or maybe 16-bit later, you can do that afterwards. But I always like to work with the highest quality possible. So if I'm just sending a track over to a friend or just have a quick listen as like a reference or anything, you know, you can just do a quick bounce as like an MP3. But if you actually want to, like if you're going to be releasing an album or anything like that, you want to be making sure that your tracks are coming out at the absolute highest quality possible. So we're going to choose Wave 24 bits. We can leave the sample rate at 44.1, file type interleaved, and for now, absolutely no dithering. We can choose one of these later if we're going from 24-bit to 16-bit later, but for now we're just going to leave it as it is right now. And of course you can choose real-time or offline here. Just for the purposes of this tutorial, I'm going to bounce it offline, it's fine. But sometimes if you want to have a listen to your track as the bounce is happening, you can choose real-time so that everything you hear is exactly how it's going to sound once it's been bounced. So let's choose offline, and we can go ahead and bounce this now. Okay, so I'm going to open up a new audio file here. Stereo, create. And let's go ahead and look for, here we go, tutorialmaster.wave. So I really like to pull my mastered files back in afterwards just as sort of a visual reference. I can take a look at the waveform and see if there's anything weird going on, and I can see, oh, you know what, maybe I compressed it, or maybe I pushed it too hard into the limiter, maybe it's time to back off or something. But I think it's always a good idea to take a look at it afterwards. All right, so this is what the mastered file looks like. This is the mix, and this is the mastered version. So let's just go ahead and zoom in a little bit. All right, so it is loud, and I'm just trying to look at the transients here. So you can see that there's this big blob of information right here, and then you still have these transients here. So these are likely going to be my kick and my snares poking through, so that they're not completely devoured by the rest of what's going on. So just by looking at it, I can tell that I've still kept some of those dynamics in, which is good. And again, you can you can always go ahead and solo and have a listen to your master track afterwards. All right, so it's not sounding too bad. Normally what I do is I go back and I'd really do some critical listening and see if there's anything else that really stands out or if there's anything that I want to change. But for now, that's pretty much how I tackle mastering my tracks. So if you guys have any questions or comments or feedback, be sure to leave those in the comments. You can always send me a message, of course. I have no idea how long this tutorial is, and I apologize if it ended up becoming a bit lengthy, but hopefully you guys had learned a thing or two. And yeah, thanks for sticking around and watching the tutorial, and we'll see you next time.